to the DraftKings Examining Cafe value for week 3. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Russell Clay at Russell J. Clay. Taking a look at a group of positions here as terms of top 3 at each. Overall, I mean, how do you feel about value this week? It seems like there's really a ton to break over, but what about the selection?
So me and the cafe value had a little, brawl, I'd say, writing this article. Initially I put these in and I was just like, you're wrong, cafe value, and I hate you. And the cafe value was like, Russ, you're an idiot and I hate you. And then like a restraining order happened and it got really ugly. And then, we got lawyers, we discussed it, and I think we came to some agreements, some mutual understandings on some things after, a long conversation.
Yeah, you kept your receipts. You slid all your personables across the table. Everything was
Yeah.
there. Yeah, I see
We
what
became
happened.
civil at the end, by the
Yeah,
end of it. Yeah.
it's for the kids. It's for the
Hmm.
kids.
Exactly.
In terms of quarterback here, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Joe Flacco, Blake Bortles. So certainly a kind of a value aspect grouping there. All pretty reasonable prices.
Yeah, and I will say, so I think this is a good exercise for people, especially, if you're trying to build a lot of lineups. You want things that are giving differing views than instead of just conforming to what you already believe. You want things that are, maybe not agreeing with you. So I think this was a really good practice for me, and I suggest, if you have our tools, to definitely dive into this as well. When I first looked at these names, I wasn't too interested. I do like Blake Bortles. I think he's an interesting stack with Allen Robinson. And just okay, so it has Joe Flacco and Blake Bortles. Maybe I should be looking closer at that game. You know what I mean? Maybe I should be looking closer at Mike Wallace. I was already in on Dennis Pitta. So, maybe Joe Flacco is an interesting tournament, stacking option. And that's kind of the conclusion I ended up heading towards. 6,100. I mean, I'm certainly not against using him in a tournament with a Dennis Pitta, who I like as a cash game tight end. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'll put a little star next to him because if Brandon Marshall doesn't play, then I'm probably not going to be on him. But if he does, I mean, we've seen the Chiefs not be the defense we kind of expected coming into the year, especially with some of their top pass rushers out. So I actually do think Ryan Fitzpatrick is interesting, especially at his price. So again, Blake Bortles a little inconsistent to start the year, but we saw what Josh McCown did against this Ravens secondary early on last week. I think he's certainly in play.
Yeah, I do too. I like both Blake Bortles and Joe Flacco. I mean, I think overall in that game, a lot of potential for back and forth play. I think the over-under is pretty mediocre when you look at it in comparison to others, which I'm not quite sure how low owned it's going to be in terms of the big guys, but you might be able to get those secondary pieces at decent ownership.
Certainly.
So, in terms of running back here, obviously we've seen D'Angelo Williams pop up pretty much in everything that you're going to run with our tools, which, as expected, when anyone's getting 30 plus touches a game, so it looks like he's just still going to be able to pay off that price tag.
We shook hands here. Mutual understanding that D'Angelo Williams going to get 30 touches again last week without Le'Veon Bell. Fire him in. He had a super tough matchup last week with the Bengals and still ended up hitting value. So while this Eagles team is probably better, it just doesn't matter for D'Angelo right now at his price. If he was 8,500, I'd certainly have to take a lot longer look. But 75, I'm in cash in all situations. Charles Sims, another play I really like at 4,900. It's going to be a battle between him and Theo Riddick for, who's the value play, who actually comes out on top. I like both. I think you can use both in all formats, so no disagreements there. Then we come to Justin Forsett. I had a long stare down and I said, sir, you can get out of my life with this idea. I don't hate it. I don't hate it at 3,900 against this Jacksonville defense that just hasn't been able to stop the run. I'm okay with this. If you're looking for a punt in a tournament and you want to be different, I could certainly see the game flow going in a direction where Blake Bortles, makes a few mistakes. Baltimore gets ahead and they have to run to salt away this game, I could see Forsett, having a good game with no other real competition in that backfield. But again, that's because it's 3,900. So I think that's an interesting way to go.
Yeah, I mean 3,900. I mean, obviously that's 1,000 cheaper than Sims. Obviously, there's a lot of other value running backs that are there this week, and I think that's just a swerve if you're really looking to pay up for a couple of other options to go with it, and kind of a really is just a swerve away from that passing game.
Definitely. And if you want to talk about super low owned, there's your boy. He's
Oh
going to
yeah,
be 3% maybe. So, especially with Jerick McKinnon right there and Charles Sims and Riddick, yeah, he's going to be 3%. So, I think that's an interesting swerve for sure.
yeah, definitely a low in play. Wide receivers, it really dove down this week in terms of kind of punt options. I mean, first one here, Cole Beasley at 3,200. Um, Obviously we saw a lot of receptions in that week one. I think in terms of PPR, it looks interesting. I don't know how much I need him this week though.
Tournaments, I don't think you can do it. Cash games, if you want to get Cooper and Antonio Brown and D'Angelo Williams, I think he's a really viable option. You just look at that upside, it's probably not there, but can he get 15? I think there's a serious chance of that against this Bears defense that just literally couldn't cover anybody the first 2 weeks of the season. So at 3,200, I think that's a little egregious in the wrong direction for DK pricing. So I certainly like him from a cafe value perspective and from hit and value perspective. Steve Smith, I can't do this one. I need to see him have a big game before I'm in. But I do think this kind of being here, with our two sets of projections we plug in here, I think he is sort of someone we should keep an eye on. And especially maybe this is a little, maybe you should hedge on Pitta and Mike Wallace a little bit. Maybe this is an indicator that, hey, maybe Steve Smith is going to be a little more involved than we generally thought. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on, not to necessarily play though. And Tyler Lockett, I like his price, but I don't like the Seattle offense right now. I don't know. I want to see Russell Wilson have a good game. I'd rather be a week late than a week early, honestly.
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, I've seen Baldwin come up still a couple of times. I think that passing game, I'm with you. I'm kind of waiting on seeing the Wilson game because you know what? We know when that comes, the train keeps going. It's not like it stops for 1 week and takes another week off. Once it gets going, it'll get going. I just don't think that's the right game. I mean, you have a 10-point spread there. I think they're just going to be running the ball a ton and just playing good defense.
And I get why you would think San Francisco is bad after last week. That was a tough task. You know what I mean? Like, they literally got the inverse of week one against the Rams. Complete opposite. We don't know what this Chip Kelly 49ers defense is going to look like yet, I don't think. We don't have an accurate sample. So they have good players on their defense. I don't know. I just don't think it's a lock that they get shelled,
No, I definitely agree. I think it is early to see what this 49ers team has to offer in terms of on the defensive side and offensive side. Because I do think Chip Kelly is just one of those dynamic coaches where we don't know until we get a good sample size what that team actually going to be. Because as you mentioned, there are good players there. It's just in terms of what he can do with them.
Right.
So, looking at tight ends here, I mean, pretty cheap options here. Not the guys I was really expecting to see, but certainly punt worthy.
So Zach Miller was the first. I looked at this list and I said, no, get out of here. I'm playing Dennis Pitta. I'm playing Dwayne Allen, and I'm logging out. And Zach Miller's making me think. He was pretty productive at the end of last season. Brian Hoyer was certainly looking at him underneath, at the end of that game. Could have just been because Prevent was sort of funneling it down there. But I actually think, not to play Kevin White, but I think those two are very interesting this week with the backup because that's who he's kind of been. That's who Hoyer was working with, on that basically second team for a lot of the summer. So Zach Miller at 29, I do like that price. I think Hoyer actually might be an upgrade in terms of stability. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch. Clive Walford obviously had a receiving touchdown last week. I'm totally in on Cooper and Cash, but I think Walford's an interesting guy as that third option in that offense to potentially think about if you want to, get exposure to that game, but you don't want the chalk. I think at 2,800, that's not much of a risk. And if you want to be different in a tournament, I'm cool with that as your punt tight end. Kyle Rudolph, I'm all set. Just give me Pitt over Rudolph. He has touchdown upside, but I'm not touching the Vikings offense other than Diggs this week. And
Yeah,
obviously sprinkle in a little McKinnon.
yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I like Kyle Rudolph. I like that where his targets have been. I mean, he's only a couple less than Diggs on the season so far, but I think I'm with you. It's easy to just go Pitta. I think if you're looking to make the swerves, it's with the top two and not really with Rudolph because of the matchup.
Right.
So, defense here. Sure, not three I'm looking at.
Okay, so Chiefs and Colts are out for me. Though it did make me think maybe the Jets offense, had a cupcake early schedule. And maybe we can look at the Chiefs. But other than that, I'm not necessarily all in on that, or the Colts. I just can't do that. I think at some point when Phillip Rivers is literally down to just his offensive linemen, we might want to start looking at targeting them, but he's just going to keep chugging along, making accurate passes. So until everybody's gone and out for the season, I think we hold off for a few more weeks. Bengals, though, I like this one. I like this call. I wasn't in on them, but I think I am now. You obviously love CJ Anderson in the run game. 2 weeks on Trevor Siemian is now. He's really, 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 really mediocre. I think this could be a potential quarterback to target going forward. And this could be a week to be ahead of the curve. I love the Bengals in tournaments. I think that's a really nice way to go. Simeon is not a good quarterback. You see him, the arm strength isn't quite there. If he makes a bad decision, it's going to get picked off. Bengals have the pressure. They can stop the run. They can potentially force Simeon into making decisions. I think that's a really, really nice play for a cheap price.
At 2,800, I mean, this is obviously a pretty good swerve off of the same defense in that game, the Broncos as well, because I would imagine they'd still carry some ownership, especially after last week. But on the road, I mean, Cincinnati, tough place to play with that defense. We know they're opportunistic in terms of turnovers. And as you mentioned, Simeon, I was expecting a little bit more efficiency out of him last game. I think that dropped me down as far as what I think about him. But yeah, I mean, I guess Bengals GPPs, I mean, at that price, they kind of make it easy to maybe drop down a little bit.
I'm sold. I love this play. And I literally was gonna have 0 Bengals shares. So I think this is a super interesting one for sure.
So this Bengals was essentially the end of the meeting. That's what you guys decided on. You hugged it out. Bengals was, the decision maker, and you walked away.
Yeah, this was big. Without this, I would have been, really angry at Cafe Value this week. But I think this is like a potential nugget that could get you some real advantage. Because, I mean, Dolphins D is going to be 30, 40%. If you can find that defense that, gets that pick six or, gets a bunch of sacks on Simeon, I think that's a really nice play.
Yeah, I definitely do as well. So that's going to wrap things up for the DraftKings Cafe value for this week. Be sure to check out dailyfantasycafe.com for our great tools and content. And if you like what you're seeing, be sure to head on and subscribe to our YouTube account.